Hello and welcome back. Long time no see. It has been a long time since our lecture together. I really miss you all. Happy to have certain feedback from you on WhatsApp group, everything. Hoping you're doing great and ready to complete our sessions together. Today, actually, we're going to start talking about a new aspect of political science. We're going to target certain axes in political science, certain components of political science. Maybe we could call them axes because they are not only terms, they started to be part of the modern political science concepts. So today we're going to talk about part of these concepts. We're going to talk about society, state, nation state, other concepts we are going to discuss whether in this lecture or in our next lecture. What are we going to do together in this lecture? As we said, we're going to discuss certain terms, concepts. We're going to concentrate on the core objectives. We're going to discuss the definition, the elements, how these concepts start, where the roots of each concept, what's the relation between these concepts together, and this track with the entire political science as whole. So we're going to talk about the objectives, the state, society, civil society. We're going to have certain questions that might be part of your coming quiz. Okay, whenever we're going to talk about these objectives of the axis, I want you to put in your mind all what we are doing in these lectures are only surveying the political science on a horizontal level. We are have a glimpse on certain corner and aspects and perspectives of political science. So I just want you to understand the basics, the concepts of political science, and why these concepts had been raised at this particular time, and to which distance these concepts are relevant to each other and are reflecting the current situation of political science as well. Let's talk first of all about states. In 21st century, state is everywhere. It is touching directly or indirectly all aspects of a human existence and life. It has become one core component of our daily life. The concept of state is omnipotent. It's everywhere. It's a kind of core aspect of the modern communities. This was not the case of a few countries only. It's a phenomena. Uh, if we're going to talk about like decades before, the idea of the state was only relevant to certain communities, certain countries. It wasn't like relevant to each country and each community. But in 21st century, it is totally there. It is part of the structure of each community. Um, it is not only something optional, it's a core. It's one of the main characteristics of the human communities. But before that, before states became one core element of the communities, it used to be a limited functioned aspect. It has limited role. To which distance? To the distance, it was only concerned with laws, norms, order, it's a little bit relevant to the structure of the government more than reflecting the entire community as a whole. Uh, Starting from this very small restricted role uh, to the wide expanded role today, we can have several stages, several changes that reach to the level of definition that we face. So, uh, talking about the definitions from the earlier scholars till the definitions we do have today, we should be very accurate about what we are talking about. Because as we mentioned before, it's not the definitions we care about, it's the progress that these definitions reflected actually during certain ages, years. So definitely these definitions are very important, but the most important point is the track, the structure that these definitions reflect. That's why we are going to discuss certain particular definitions from certain particular thinkers and scholars' point of view, perspectives, tracking the progress of the concept of state through these definitions. If you're going to talk about the definition of any political science term, definitely we're going to have many scholars, many thinkers who had certain participation in this. But we could never ever ignore the particular participation and contribution of Aristotle as one of the most important thinkers of political science. So, starting from any point you want till today modern scholars' definitions, we should take into account the progress from Aristotle till the last attempt to define state. In 4th century Aristotle, who we know as the father of political science, defined the state based on his own perspective. According to him, state is a union of families, villages, who have for its end a perfect and self-sufficing life, by which we mean happy, honorable, suitable life. So to Aristotle, it is very important to focus on the perfect state, as we know that the entire idea of Aristotle was seeking the perfection in things. Based on this, he was trying to create a perfect image about the state. So he tried to describe it as a state where people are living in a happy, comfortable, honorable way. According to other scholars, this definition is so comprehensive that it can hardly be improved upon. Aristotle's definition communicates the primary objectives of the state. However, we must study some more definitions of the state to be capable to understand how things change. How does government, state, community, people are coexist together, and how is the current shape of states born? But I want you to remember always that we do focus on the function of the state as the core element of the definition. So again, whenever we were trying to find a certain definition of the state, it was the definition of function as the core element of describing these definitions. Another scholar who is very important in dealing, describing, and analyzing certain political aspects in political science was Holland. Holland also had his contribution in political science. One of his contributions was his attempt to define state in a way or another. According to his point of view, state is a politically organized people of a definite territory. Here, if you do notice, to the first time, we see the concept of the geographic criteria in defining the state. So it is no more only about people, political state, or political structure. It is more combined with the idea of the geographic criteria of building the communities, states, states. Why? Because if you do remember, at that time, certain states tried to have their independence. The idea of colonization, occupation was trying to disappear, and many colonies were trying to be separate from, for example, the entire occupation forces in the world. So, by this environment, by this path, the idea of the geographic criteria was born. Some scholars of political science even demanded to have a certain track in political science called geopolitics, because they believe that geography is one of the most important elements that determine the shape of political science as a whole. So, according to Holland, it's politically organized people of definite territory. Another scholar called Harold Laski, he's one of the most important thinkers in political science as well, and one of the most important scholars who had a great contribution in describing a lot of political phenomena and events. He described the state as a territorial theory divided into government and subjects, claiming within its allotted physical area supremacy over all other institutions. What does this mean? It is again focused on the function, the geographic criteria, and on the linkage between this. But if you were trying to create a shape or to define the elements of these definitions, definitely we are going to talk about 4 core elements. These elements are population, territory, government, sovereignty. These 4 elements are the core important elements in defining all the contributions of scholars in defining states in that era. After that, we have a very important scholar or thinker who is Prof. Woodrow Wilson. He's also tried to define the state from his own perspective, saying that state is a group of people organized for law within a definite territory. Actually, this is one of the shortest definitions we can see or find in history. But in spite of being so short, it's still a little bit enough and complete in the aspect of or in the reference of combining the 4 elements we talked about. So even if this is a short definition in reference to the 4 elements, it still reflects the 4 core elements of defining the state. Because things are very accumulative and things change very quickly and dynamically, we had another thinker who called Gardner, and if you do search for Gardner, he's one of the most important political science thinker. He said that all political science concepts must be analyzed as separate concepts with certain elements and aspects. So, when he is talking about a concept of political science, which is called the state, he defined it as a community of persons, more or less numerous, permanently occupying definite portion of territory, independent or nearly so, of external control and possessing an organized government to which the great body of inhabitants render habitual obedience. Does this remind you with anything in particular? Actually, yes. It does remind us with the idea of social contract. Do you remember when we talked about the concept of social contract? When we said that we have a great scholars who decided to talk about the social contract like look, hopes, etc., etc. Gardner was trying to build a linkage between this track and the fourth elements that other scholars put. So he was trying to describe the relation between the government and the people. To him, it was not enough only to mention what is going on in building this community. He was concerned more about the relation between these elements as well. After discussing these particular definitions, it's very important to be very realistic. So, if we have a look around us today, nowadays we do live in a way of very modern, dynamic, accelerated communities and tracks. We are in the era of globalization, fast globalization, where international relations and international politics uh, as a science is one of the most important sciences that determining a lot of aspects of our lives. So where does this idea started from? We can say that considering the definition given by Fellmer could give a glimpse of the starting point of this. So Fellmer definition takes into account the perspective of international law as an aspect of building the concept of a state. According to him, state is a group of people permanently occupying a fixed territory bound together by common laws, habits, and costumes into one body politic, exerting through the medium of an organized government independent sovereignty and control over people and things within its boundaries, capable of making war and peace and of entering into all international relations with the countries of the world. So, if we started to talk that the early definitions talked about only the function and the four elements, then we had the idea of talking about not only the elements but the linkage of these elements. Fellmer took the definition to another advanced level. He was trying to describe the idea behind this level as the core of function, a new function. He was moving the function of the state instead of focusing in the function of the state inside the community to another level to outside the community. And the idea of involving the decision of war and peace and entering international relations of international bodies was a very controversial idea because if you do remember, we started to talk about how states starting to be independent and how they get separated from other occupations, etc., etc. So the concept of having the decision of war and peace was one of the most important controversial concepts that anyone could have. So this definition exactly still reflecting his own ideas till nowadays definitions. Why? Because the idea of making uh, international relations or international policies or foreign policies is one of the most critical elements of describing the states till today. For example, let's have a modern example from our communities. When United States of America decided to occupy Iraq, was it only a decision of inside United States, or is it a decision of war and peace? And is it a kind of determining the identity of the state? Okay, another description or another example. The idea of Hezbollah, for example, inside Lebanon. Do you think Nowadays, we can describe the state of Lebanon in a separate way of Hezbollah, for example, and his relations with Iran and the entire structure of the community. So, this concept or this definition particularly reflected the great progress of political science through years. This definitions not only extended the scope of the state, and it's not only added the fifth definition to the fourth previous elements, it even changed the boundaries of the state in a way or another. It changed the idea of the traditional function of the state to move it to another level, to a modern level, to the level of international relation in a way or another. And this is one of the most critical aspects of political science, as we said. Okay, so after all these definitions, it is very important to talk about the core elements of the state. What is the core components? In spite of all the definitions, progress, moving from elements to another, various definitions, various perspectives, etc., we should have, in a way or another, a common element to say that is it a state or not. So if we go back to the four core elements of the community: population, territory, government, sovereignty, each of these elements needed to be studied in a separate way to see to which distance they are core elements or they move to be a secondary level of structure. Okay, let's start talking about population. Population, actually, we cannot imagine a state without people, without citizens, right? The problem here is how much population is an issue that can be debated. For example, India is overpopulated states, whereas Australia is underpopulated states. This issue has engaged the attention of scholars from time, from early attempts to describe political science, actually. Aristotle was talking of certain limits of population, and he said that it is not important to have large number of population. Small is enough to be well governed and big enough to be self-sufficient. But there is no denying the fact that without population there is no state. The problem in nowadays description of states is the idea of immigration and refugees and the idea of citizenship. Who is the original citizens of this community? Who are the native people of this community, actually? This is the modern question of population that we can discuss nowadays. Okay, if we move to another level or another element, which is territory, like without population, we cannot think of a state. Without a territory, we cannot say that we have a country or a state. A state can exercise its authority over well-defined territory, over one particular geographic area. The idea of boundaries nowadays and modern political science is one of the most important, crucial, controversial ideas because, for example, let's talk about مجلس تعاون الخليج, for example, or الاتحاد الأوروبي, EU. One of the most important elements in shaping or structuring these communities was the idea of geographic boundaries. To which distance the sovereignty over certain geographic area is very important. Fixed territory is necessary for legal purpose, for emotional purpose. People need to have a fixed territory, to have this affiliation, loyalty to their country, without they call motherland or fatherland, they will get lost. They need this kind of union to build their own community. Territory is so important that normally there are disputes over borders between states, two states or even more. For example, India and Pakistan have a huge history of war over Kashmir, for example. India and China had a huge conflict over certain geographic places. For example, Libya and Egypt. Um, uh, many historical uh, problems, wars raised based on geographic fights or boundaries, actually. Facts well defined territory is also necessary for legal purpose. So a state has control over land, water, resources, wealth, airspace, etc., etc., is a strong independent state. While if the state lost this kind of ownership, definitely, it will be a semi-state, or we might call it anything else, but not a state. In spite of all what we said about the importance of the geographic criteria, it is so important that to say, as any similar things in this world, it is very important to say that there are certain exceptions in this rule of geographic criteria. The rule is not an abstract, it is not an absolute rule. Uh, how this could happen? Let's talk about Bedouin. Let's talk about certain tribes who used to move from region to region. Let's talk about certain races like Armenian, like Caucasians, like Al-Amazigh, for example, in Morocco, etc., etc. They are building their own communities, giving themselves own identity, but they don't uh, define their own states based on the geographic criteria. They are saying their nation uh, is not limited to certain geographic criteria. They are more affiliated to the concept of the identity, the race they belong to, or the culture they belong to, or the track of life or the style of life they belong to. Actually, we should admit it is not easy to say whether this is correct or not, or whether we can even consider them as a state or not, because there are a group of people who have their own identity. Maybe they have their own history, they have their own country components like culture, bounds, etc., etc. So whether they are do live in one geographic area or not is a question that thinkers keep trying to find an answer to. So we reach our puzzle for today. I want you to search for the most important states who had a very remarkable progress in building their identity, and in a terminological order they tried to achieve certain progress in defining their states, whether in their independency track, or whether in moving from dictator to democratic, or whether even to build a new community from scratch. Please pick three of them, and it's not only about picking countries or states. You need also to tell me why did you pick these states, to what criteria did you depend in selecting these states, and give me a small paragraph about each state. So picking three states, telling me why did you pick them, the historical progress of them, and tell me, would you ever think this is a successful example or not? Okay, we reached to the end of our lecture together today. I hope this was a smooth, nice, easy class. Thank you so much for joining me. Please always remember that things are exactly how you want to see. It is not how they are really. Be safe until I meet you in the coming class. Be safe. Bye.